All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfrey, and thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. Yeah, we're just off the heels. Memorial Day was a little bit ago, but yeah, it is now the month of June. So, yeah. This year's been weird. Took us forever to get through the first 3 months. Right? I mean, maybe I'm alone in that, but that felt like it just went on and on and on. Um, then man, yeah, last month drug out too. Don't know what it was, but that felt like a week longer than May usually is. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Yeah, in fact, it could be. But that's that. So what do we got today? We'll be reviewing UFC on ESPN 68. What a clown fiesta! Good grief. Yeah, we're gonna go over that. That poor card. I I don't know. We'll talk about it. We will have a preview for UFC 316. That's this coming Saturday. It's not the strongest pay-per-view in the world. I'm relatively ambivalent to the top two fights. I mean, what am I most looking forward to on that card? Because it's not either of the top two. Not that they're bad fights, but one women's bantamweight is a wasteland. And I don't care that much about Merab and O'Malley. Maybe Patchy Mix's UFC debut is probably what I'm looking forward to the most. Um, it's just it's slim pickings on that card. I don't know, man. Maybe I've just soured on it a little bit too much. Um, a lot of people were doing we're finally through May when everything was terrible, and now at least we got June, and things are kind of stacked through here. And I'm not saying there's no cause for optimism. Again, maybe my cynicism and pessimism is rearing its head a little bit too much, in which case, you know what? I will acknowledge that. But I think the last couple of weeks I've soured a little bit on this card. Maybe unfairly. Maybe you feel very, very differently. God bless if you do. There's other stuff I'm looking forward to more coming up than 316, but that's kind of where we are. Then we have news. Boy, do we have some news. Um, very little of it good. Uh, yeah. So anything you can do to help the product is always appreciated. Like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review. You all know the drill, whatever's applicable to your podcast platform of choice, and sharing us around. If you are on a social media platform and want to let everyone know that, hey, here's the show, I like it, please do so. That's always appreciated. Or if you know anyone in real life who you think might be edified or entertained by my ramblings. So, and really, you're listening. That's the most important thing. So the rest of that is stuff you can do if you feel so inclined, and I'd appreciate it. Uh, if not, then just listening's enough. So thank you. All right. Yeah, it's a little bit of a longer intro than usual, but I don't know. I'm on a weird day. Not a bad day. Just lack of sleep because insomnia sucks. And it's not too. I'm not even recording this late. Like, I don't know. We'll see. Let's jump into this, shall we? Now that I've rambled a bit too much. So, UFC on ESPN 68. Um, golly. I have to go over this before we get into the fights in particular. Before we get into the fights in particular. Even I can't even really talk about like my record for predictions before getting through this. So bear with me. This fight card started life with I think 12 fights announced. One of those fell out a while ago and they couldn't make it come together, so we entered fight week with 11 fights on the card. Then fight day happened, and we lost the Trevin Giles and who was he fighting? Gustafson, right? Andreas Gustafson? Yeah. So that fell apart. Apparently, Giles fell uh, during his weight cut process and banged his head and wasn't cleared to fight. And fair enough, that happens. Um, you'd like to think that professionals at this level would have someone with them at all times to kind of try and remove some of that, especially if you're doing a fairly severe weight cut. And Giles, even making 180 on the notice that he did, is a non-trivial weight cut, but it might have also just been a legitimately completely freak accident. No shade coming from me on that one. It happens. So that happened, and that fight completely fell apart. So we're down to 10. Then we had a couple of weight misses. So Macy Barber missed weight, half of your main event. So that's trouble. Um, Alan Nascimento missed weight. So Barber weighed 126 and a half. So she missed by half a pound, and she looked awful on the scale. I mean, just terrible. That looked like the result of a really bad weight cut. Um, some of the people, because this is MMA, some of the people online did well, it looks like she had cosmetic surgery, specifically breast augmentation. And that might account for that half a pound there. And let me do a couple of things here. One, quit being weird. Two, yeah, that is extra weight in your body. Sort of depending on what procedure. There's a bunch of different ways to go about that. And depending on first of all, this is assuming she did. And it very much looks like she did. I'm not passing judgment on her for having cosmetic surgery. Um, I have no opinion on that. Um, really. It just doesn't matter to me at all. But it is introducing something to your body that you can't cut weight. Um, the same thing kind of happened with Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Now, her more of her struggles getting to straw weight coincided not so much with her uh, cosmetic surgery, but more with her altering her weight training program and just getting jacked. Because if you look at her when she wasn't really struggling to make 115, and then when you look at her when she was, ignoring the ignoring the cosmetic surgery aspect, she is just yoked. Like for a woman her size, she's just really jacked, especially through the back and shoulders. Like she put a lot of effort into her weight training, and that just became, even without augmentation, I think that still would have been a very hard cut for her. And so when it comes to Macy Barber, I'm sure having implants doesn't make it easier, but there's plenty of other fighters who have those and don't have these same problems, who don't look like that on the scale. Like there's a lot of stuff that went wrong here for her, and theoretically cosmetic surgery is probably low down on the list of things that may have caused those problems. Again, it is introducing extra weight to the body that you can't really manipulate. But one, it's not a super large amount of weight. Two, again, a bunch of other stuff looks like it went wrong. So quit being weird, first of all. And second, this was your title shot audition, right? The winner of this, it was going to kind of come down to how the winner of this looked to see if they might be able to get ahead of Natalia Silva in the pecking order and enter into a title shot. If that's the case, you cannot miss weight. It's better if you actually make 125, which Erin Blanchfield did, by the way. She actually made championship weight. And Barber couldn't make the easier weight class. Again, non-title, they just give you a pound. I'm still not sure why. Okay, occasionally this comes up, and I just now like I go like I have to look that up, and I never quite get around to it. I really should, but anyway, I know exactly who to ask about that too. All right, neither here nor there. So that was a bit of a screw up from Barber. Um, the Macy Chasson and Ketlin Vieira fight bumped up to women's featherweight at Vieira's request because she screwed up her weight cut. So that fight got bumped up. And I mentioned Alon Nascimento missed weight. He weighed 127 and a half, so that was a fairly serious miss on his part. Um, did I switch my pick to him? It was one of those I switched. No, he wound up being one of my two incorrect as it played out. I thought about it. I'll get to that when I get to the fight. I'll leave that alone. So anyway, we're down to 10 fights on this card. We've had 2 serious weight misses and 1 fight that changed its weight class. This is not exactly going great. Then the fights start, and through 9 fights, so up until the co-main event down, we get 3 finishes. Now, I am not a believer that finish equals exciting fight. In fact, if you look at like the best fights in boxing and MMA, the very best ones go long. Usually they go the full distance. So I don't believe look at all these finishes. The action must have been good. Well, anybody can book mismatches. And by the same token, just because we had a bunch of decisions doesn't, again, if we kind of turn this around, that doesn't mean a lot of the fights were really exciting and had drama and all that fun stuff. But the point there is, you can look a little bit at that kind of a finish rate for a card, and there's some reasonable conclusions you can draw. Then we get done with Mateusz Gamrot and Ludovic Klein. And they play the hype package for the main event. They have the video thing they play, and then the person starts walking out. So they get done with the hype package, and the music doesn't hit for Macy Barber because she would have walked out first. She was ranked lower. Nothing's happening. So they cut to the commentary team, and poor Brendan Fitzgerald, God bless him, he handled this like a pro. And he says, well, Macy Barber was supposed to start walking out now. She's not walking. We're going to have to figure this out. This doesn't happen very often. This is extraordinarily rare. But yeah, so we're going to go to commercial, and we're going to figure this out. Stay with us. Again, bless that man. He's a quality broadcaster. Because at the same time, you got Daniel Cormier over there quasi-gesticulating. God, Cormier was terrible. Terrible's a bit strong. There were spots where he was really bad last night, but I'm not going to rail on the commentary. So we go to commercial. We come back, and the main event's off. We throw to and commentary has to cover for this for a little bit while the production team figures out what are we going to do. So Daniel Cormier does they go through the list of like, okay, so there was a medical issue with Macy Barber. They don't get more specific than that on the broadcast yet. But they say, medical issue, she is not medically cleared to fight. And, well, this sucks for her, and this sucks for Erin Blanchfield. Because Erin would have been in the back, warmed up, ready to walk, because Macy Barber walks to the ring, then Erin Blanchfield walks to the ring. This is all done in order. And Cormier goes, man, this must suck. This must really suck for Blanchfield. In fact, I bet she's back there crying. Right about then, we do cut to a camera that's in the Blanchfield locker room, where she is not crying, kind of smiling, but that like exasperated smile, because like it's the smile you give when you don't know what else to do. And it was just a really funny like bit of timing on that. So Blanchfield then talked with Megan O'Leary, and bless her as well, she handled that Olivi. She handled this difficulty with aplomb. And Blanche, like, well, I was told that Macy Barber had a seizure. Now, the exact timing of this is a little bit unclear. It's kind of intimated that she was. I don't think they call it this in the UFC, but I have a bit of a wrestling background as well as a fan, so she was like at the gorilla position. If you're not familiar with that, in professional wrestling, the gorilla position is the area right behind the walkout curtain. So if you watch WWE stuff, they have this big room set up back there for, and whoever's running the show sits back there and they have their headset and they monitors and they communicate with everyone and they kind of run the show from there. Not the production show because it's a production truck, but they kind of run and manage things from there. Vince was there forever, now Triple H sits there. But that's the gorilla position because back in the day, that's where Gorilla Monsoon always was, to talk with wrestlers and run things, make sure things happen smoothly, and give advice and all that stuff. So it's called that after him in his honor. I don't know what they call it in UFC, if the production has a nickname for that spot, but for want of a better expression, she was in the gorilla position, ready to walk, and then again, if what if what Aaron Blanchfield was told was correct, had a seizure. Look, if you have a seizure, you shouldn't be fighting. Like, just straight up. And Blanchfield, she's gotten mixed results from what she said after the fact, some of which I understand. Because Blanchfield, so ultimately, main event's canceled. Commentary has to vamp for a little bit. Bless them, they tried. I mean, I don't even say that pejoratively. I mean, like, seriously, they did about as good as could be expected to fill the remainder of a little bit of enough airtime to then get out of there safely. They did their best, and it is a very, very unideal circumstance for them, but they tried. They really did. So, yeah, in the aftermath of that, Blanchfield kind of went scorched earth on Macy Barber. Now, if this was just... How do I phrase this? If the build-up to this had been normal, maybe even a little bit heated, but kind of the normal fight build, I might have a very different opinion of what Blanchfield said than I do. Because she came out and did she needs to get her life in order. She needs to think about a new weight class. She's just buried her. Here's why I'm a bit more understanding of that. Let's not pretend that Macy Barber wasn't trying to spit fire and brimstone in the build-up to this. Because she was. And if this was just Blanchfield after a normal build with even heated but respectful dialogue, I'd feel a lot... Again, I would feel very differently than I do. But when you put out a lot of noise, this is a friggin' biblical principle. It's one of those eternal truths that we can't quite get away from. Cause and effect. You reap what you sow. If you put out a bunch of noise and sound bites and arrogance and dismissive attitudes towards your opponent and blah, 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 you do not get sympathy even when it's warranted on the back end. This isn't all that complicated as far as behavior. Now, we don't know exactly what caused the seizure at this point. Macy Barber had a boatload of health issues. She was off for a while between fights. Whether or not the bad weight cut contributed to it. So there's a lot of stuff still up in the air that we don't know, so I'm not going to speculate. I'm just going to say the following. If you miss weight after a lot of heated talk, and then you don't make the walk, even if it's medically required that you not make it, after the way you've behaved in general, your opponent does not owe you sympathy. You put out a bunch of this noise into the MMA space, that's what's going to rebound at you. Always. Always. I'd rather, someone's medical emergency not be used as ammunition against them. But if I'm Blanchfield and I've had to deal with all this for a while, the whole build up to this fight, and then your opponent misses weight, which is always bad. Then Blanchfield actually said, like, I'm worried about her getting to the cage, and Barber had a bunch of rhetoric to counter that. And then you don't actually make it to the cage. Like, I'm not gonna sit up here and pretend that this isn't prize fighting. I know some people buy into the Bushido BS. Never mind how that. Somebody needs it. If you're not familiar with the actual history of this, yes, the concept of Bushido was written about anciently. Do you know when it became popular? Fun fact about this. Again, you can look up who actually wrote some of the stuff where it appears. The theoretical code of conduct for the samurai, way back in the day, was never adopted, was never widespread. It gained popularity during the imperial reign of Japan because it could be twisted by the imperial forces to engender more fanatical devotion and obedience and all that stuff. Like the entire renaissance of a lot of the writings of those of people from that era was during the like 1920s and 30s in Japan, well, like again like 20s and 30s in Japan, when the government like figured they could use it to propagandize and manipulate the populace. That's when it gained popularity. So just again, spare me. Spare me. This is people giving each other brain damage for money. There's just skill and strategy involved. But I don't like fighters always being at each other's throats. I really don't. I do like when we all get to lie to each other, to ourselves and each other a little bit about the nature of what we're doing when they display more humanity. I would rather that was the mode of behavior, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend I don't understand and that I don't. Again, most of that I don't understand. So I do. And again, I'd rather not, but that's where we are. And some of this is also, Aaron Blanchfield being hyper competitive, and I assume really looking forward to hitting some Macy Barber in the face a lot, and that not happening, and then being asked about it immediately in the aftermath of your fight falling apart. Man, if you've never been around people who fight professionally, to get yourself in that space is a mental and emotional thing as much as it is physical. If you've ever been to an MMA gym, a good gym, the people in charge of it, if you're new especially, they will keep you away from the people who are gearing up for a fight because that's a different breed. And I don't mean like professional fighters, a little bit that, but even professional fighters are wildly different when they're not in the last bit of getting ready for a fight. You go places, man. Again, physically, mentally, and emotionally for that. And to have that fall apart, to be rug pulled like that, and then to be asked, well, what do you think about your opponent? You're not always going to be as charitable as you should or could. And that also changed a little bit by personality type depending on the individual. I mean, in the aftermath of this, a lot of us were reminded of other times when fights have fallen apart last minute. There was the time when Jamal Emmers had back spasms, like Chaz Skelly had walked to the cage. It was in the Apex, God help us. And Skelly was like, okay, ready, and then Emmers didn't walk. Like, back spasm so bad he couldn't. I remember that. That was awkward. Felt bad for Skelly a little bit, but nothing you could do about it. The one that people remembered in particular was more Matt Mitrione and Stefan Struve. This was Stefan Struve a little bit after he'd come back. He had a heart condition that kept him out of action for a long time. He got treatment, jumped through a bunch of medical hoops, was cleared to come back. Then a little bit before his fight with Matt Mitrione is supposed to start, he starts getting heart palpitations severe enough that he has to consult a medic. And when you have a heart condition from earlier, it's understandable. And there's video of this, of Dana White going to tell Matt Mitrione fights off. And Mitrione is pissed for a minute. And then, sad, because he wanted to fight, get paid. And then he goes, well, you know what? Thank God that didn't happen during the fight, because that could be real serious. And he goes to see Struve, the guy who was getting ready to punch in the face, and who was getting ready to punch him in the face. And he just tells him, like, yeah, man, get healthy. Better here than under other circumstances when it could be a lot worse. And people like that, and I like that. I'd rather that was the way we all were, but I'm just not going to throw Aaron Blanchfield under the bus for expressing frustration at a person who's been digging at her and has been putting forward an unlikable presence. Again, you court that, then the backlash gets to be severe. So I don't have any ill will towards Macy Barber. I hope they figure out whatever's wrong with her. Your life is far more important than fighting. So what if she needs to step away from this, or whatever she has to do to get herself healthy, do it. Again, her life is more than fighting. But if we're just talking about, again, cause and effect, she has put out a lot of noise for a long time. She came in with a bunch of hype and did the I'm going to be the youngest champion in UFC history. I've got a countdown clock, so I know how long it is until I can break John Jones' record. There's a lot of stuff like that. And that kind of ambition, arrogance, it can be a real fine line to walk in terms of whether people get on board and relate to you positively and start supporting you, or they roll their eyes and dismiss you and start kind of waiting for your downfall. That's a really fine line to walk. And I don't think she did well if we're just talking the PR side of things. So, yeah, that fight fell through, and the other reason Aaron Blanchfield kind of did that was mostly to make it clear I don't want to deal with her again. I don't want to fight her again. Honestly, had Barber made weight and then this happened, I think a chunk of the reaction from Blanchfield would have been a little bit different, but because she called her on Blanchfield called Barber unprofessional. Medical emergency stemming from seizure is not really a professionalism thing. Assuming that it's not been brought on by mismanagement of weight, there's a lot of things that could affect it. Some of which could have been handled and mitigated via professionalism at other stages. But we don't know that specifically, and I'm not going to speculate. I'm just saying that is a contributing factor. But you miss weight, and then you fall out at the last minute, and it's just... So I understand where Blanchfield's coming from, even if that's not how I, in general, would prefer those kinds of interaction go. I mean, this doesn't happen very often to main events. How many other main events have fallen out last minute? I mean, there's always the joke about Kevin Randleman slipping on a pipe and his fight with Pedro Hizzo falling out. Was it UFC 3 that Royce Gracie came out to the cage just to withdraw from the event? I think. I don't remember if that was the main event, though. It is a rarity for the UFC. Just throwing that out there. But, man, this is what happens when the UFC schedule kind of is what it is. They got one of these cards pretty much every week. They don't care about who's on it. They don't build these very thoughtfully. I don't mean there's zero thought, but the goal of the UFC is to get enough fighters on each card to meet their broadcast deal requirements. That's it. And some of that is starting to break down for the fight. Like, some of the fighters are starting to not be able to keep up with the schedule in a lot of respects. I don't know. So yeah, that fell apart. Didn't happen. So let's get to the fights that did. I've spent way too much time talking about this already, and I don't really want to be here forever. So, what your de facto main event? Mateusz Gamrot defeated Ludovic Klein via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Klein's did okay, but this was a really big step up for him, and They both kind of gassed themselves out over the first two rounds. Gamrot, he's got a lot of tools, but he doesn't seem to master a lot of them. Uh, I don't know. This wasn't great. It was an okay fight. There was a couple of nice takedowns from Gamrot, a few okay scrambles, but I don't know. One of those fights where, I don't know that I needed 15 minutes. Next up, Ramiz Brahimaj defeated Billy Ray Goff via technical submission, a guillotine choke, had a nice high elbow guillotine. 3:16 of the first. So Goff winds up kind of shooting in. Well, actually, I think Brahimaj took him down. Goff scrambles. Brahimaj grabs at a ninja choke at first. Goff gets his head a little bit off to the side, is able to avoid most of that, so Brahimaj switches to the high elbow variant. Good call, tactically. You can see Goff technically does tap right before he goes to sleep, but nobody sees it. Then goes to sleep. Brahimaj drops him. Nice submission. Light heavyweights, Dustin... Oh, I'll do my prediction thing at the end of this. I just want to get through this. Light heavyweights next, Dustin Jacoby defeated Bruno Lopez via knockout punches. I did switch my pick on this one. I was kind of going with the odds as much as anything else, and I just felt worse and worse about Lopez the longer that went on. Jacoby just kind of stumbled him with a fairly stiff jab early on, and then swung like a madman as he had Lopez on the fence until he finally clipped him and put him down. Ketlin Vieira defeated Macy Chasson via unanimous decision, 229-28 and a 30-27. Chasson just stuck on her back for giant stretches of time, and you can't win fights that way. Zachary Reese defeated Dushko Todorovic via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. Pretty good first round from these two. A lot of choke attempts from Todorovic. He set a pace that he just couldn't sustain, unfortunately. And they're both just kind of gassed after the first. So first round of this is pretty fun. Then watch like a minute or two of the second round, and that'll tell you everything you need to know. On the prelims, Alan Nascimento defeated Jafel Filho via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. Couple of fun scrambles in here. Here's the thing about this one. Filho wins the first round by getting the back. The problem though is in the second round he tries to get the back, and then slips off and gets stuck underneath for the rest of the round. Kind of the same thing happens in the third. First of all, Nascimento's a big flyweight. I got real close to changing my mind on this one. The closer we got to the fight, then the weight miss happened, and I kind of talked myself into letting it stand. And then, Philly even had a really good first round, but back-taking in MMA is such a weird thing these days. Because the back is not the finishing position it used to be, for a variety of reasons. But it is the strongest position for winning a round. You can theoretically win a round if you're on your back and they're in full guard. You can do stuff from there enough to win a round. It's rare, but it happens. You cannot win a round with the other guy on your back for long stretches of time. Just can't happen. So there was a little bit. So that's what the position is mostly used for in modern MMA, more than like a guaranteed finish or even like a really good finishing position. It's largely about threatening the finish, but putting yourself in the safest position possible while in a position that, as unequivocally as can be in modern MMA, wins you the round. And Filho just couldn't get the back in rounds 2 and 3, and both times when he really went for it, he got punished positionally and never recovered. Jordan Levitt, next up, defeated Kurt Holloway via technical submission anaconda choke. Holloway did not tap. Again, Goff technically did. You can kind of see it, but the ref didn't see it, and I don't think anyone saw it until the replay. So he still went to sleep before the ref waved it off, so it's a technical submission anyway. Anyway, this one, Holloway didn't tap. But Levitt caught him in an anaconda choke, 139 of the first. Pretty quick takedown from Levitt, forced the grappling, good front headlock sequence, really nice anaconda. Finished it kind of the same way that you see like Brian Ortega finish his anaconda choke a lot. Um, nice stuff from him. Yeah, Levitt. He's a weird dude. He's not a weird guy like as a human being. He's a fighter that I don't have a great handle on because he's one of those guys who got to the UFC with a fairly lopsided skill set and I think was very unused to the physicality of higher level MMA. And he seems to be fixing that. So, thumbs up. Talked about overcoming some of his personal demons about this, the way he thought about himself. Yeah, I I'm curious to see what he does. He's young enough that he could make a push of this, but he's another one of those guys who the impression you get of him over the first like 3 fights can be a little bit hard to shake, even though he was young when he got here and has clearly developed since then. So I'm trying to be more clear-headed about him because man, I was thinking about Holloway as a pick before this, and glad I let the odds talk me out of that one. I definitely need to more assess Levitt based on the last 2 fights of his than the first 2 in the UFC, if that makes sense. So, lightweight next, Balaji Oki defeated Michael Aswell, 29-28 across the board. Aswell stepped in here during fight week. Oki was supposed to fight. Who was he supposed to fight? Markel Medeiros. Medeiros pulled out again during fight week, like 3 days out, some illness. So he was replaced by Aswell. Aswell normally fights at featherweight. Made a decent account of himself, but you'd never mistake these two for being like in the same weight class normally. Oki's a guy who looks like he got by a lot on people not knowing how to deal with being hit. And he's now at a level where guys know how to react to that. And his power is not... He's got weird punching mechanics. Now, that's not the end of the world. Some guys just have weird mechanics but still have, like, God-given power. Oki doesn't seem to have God-given power. I'm sure it worked well for him at the lower levels, but he's really got to refine some stuff. He had good body work, which I always appreciate. His problem is, like, he wasn't consistent enough to the body, which would have helped him here. Anyway. So, as well, I'd be curious to see down at featherweight. His more natural weight class. Yeah. What did Jack Slack say about this one that made me laugh? Oh, yeah. If these were light heavyweights, this would have been an okay fight, but they're lightweights, so yeesh. Kind of agree. And kicking everything off in your fight of the night, actually, Alice Ardolian defeats Hayani Dos Santos via unanimous decision. 229-28 and a 30-27. This is your fight of the night because everything else kind of sucked. All these two did was like circle and then come together and do the combination for pad work, then back off and circle and repeat. A lot of rear hand leads from Ardolian that Dos Santos just never adjusted to, never adapted. I mean, this was a not good fight, but because it had quote-unquote action, I shouldn't say quote-unquote action, because it wasn't boring, it wasn't devoid of things happening, it stuck enough to get fight of the night. So, good for them, I guess. Damning indictment on the rest of this card. Just put it that way. Damning indictment. I really thought after the main event fell out that the UFC was just not going to give a fight of the night. And as it stands, your bonuses, let me do this, then I'll get into my predictions and how that went very briefly. Your bonuses went to Ramiz Brahimaj, Jordan Levitt, and then fight of the night to Ardolian and Dos Santos. Poor Dustin Jacoby can't catch a break. Got the only knockout on this entire card and still couldn't get a bonus. Utter shame. All right. As for the predictions, I'll run through these real fast. So, I stuck with Brahimaj when I looked more into like how everything fell apart for some of these fights. Um, yeah, and ultimately I was glad I did. Let me see. The Gustafsson fight didn't happen. I stuck with Vieira because they changed weight classes. I think if she had had a really bad cut and still missed weight, but they still officially fought at bantamweight, I would have switched my pick. But the switching of weight classes, despite Vieira basically missing weight, and she actually did forfeit a percentage of her purse to make that fight happen. The switching of classes was enough, all things considered, to have me stay with her. So there's that. Again, the Filio and Nascimento one, man, I'm kicking myself for not changing my pick on that. Part of it is just the size. Nascimento's a big flyweight. I mean, he's almost as tall as Cormier. He's a big dude for that weight class. And Filio hadn't. I mentioned that the time off for Nascimento was a consideration in my prediction there. I didn't realize that Filio had been out for over a year as well. A lot of that I probably should have rethought. But ultimately, 7-2. I mentioned I switched the Jacoby and Lopez pick. Again, rewatching the last couple of fights from Jacoby, he didn't seem as washed as I was worried about when I was going back over some of his stuff in my head. And Lopez did not look as good as no, just no on that one. So ultimately 7-2 of the 9 fights that took place, with stuff falling out. That leads me to 162 and 52, 162, 52 and 1 on the year. There is the draw. I'm okay with that. Again, I'm just kind of happy to put that card in the rear view mirror, and let us never speak of the short. Some people have said this is the worst card in modern UFC history. I'll caveat that with modern, which is appropriate. There have been a few during the Apex years that have been bad. There was one headlined by Jessica I and Cynthia Calvillo. Boy, that was awful. Wasn't there one headlined by Norma Dumont and Aspen Ladd? I think Aspen Ladd and Jermaine Durandamy headlined one of these. Hang on, now I must check. Hang on. So, yeah, Ladd versus Dumont headlined in 2021. Yeesh. Not that. Yeah, I versus Calvillo headlined in June of 2020. God, that was terrible. Here's the thing about. So this one definitely is in the conversation. Let me be very clear. If you wanted to give it to this one because the only legitimately relevant fight on the card fell out at the last minute, and considering the rest of this, a lack of finishes, a lack of memorable action in general. I am not here to argue with anyone if they're going to put this as the worst card of the last if we separate this into post-pandemic stuff, since the advent of the Apex, basically, golly. If you wanted to put this atop that list, I'm not arguing with you too much. I'd have to go back to some of those other cards in a bit more detail to figure things out. So, and if that's the point, I think if I have to go back and seriously reconsider things to try and refute your point, I think ultimately whether I agree with your point or not, I think it has merit and should not be dismissed lightly. Yeah, just bad card. Full report in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com. Go give it a read if you're so inclined. I appreciate it. Okay, that took a bit longer than I thought it would, but, well, here we are. So, let's move on to UFC 316 as a preview. So, the UFC is back on pay-per-view. They are trying to get away from the stench of the last couple of events. We are in New Jersey, and as I mentioned, I have soured a bit on this card over the last few weeks. Um, I'm not trying to be overly pessimistic, but this just isn't, it isn't hitting for me, if you'll forgive the parlance. Main event is a rematch for the bantamweight title. Champion Merab Dvalishvili defends against Sean O'Malley, the man he beat for the belt. So O'Malley's coach said something that was probably a little bit true, but also in some respects put his foot in his mouth when he said, "You know, I rewatched the first fight between these two, as a good coach would, and there was a bunch of strikes and whatnot from Sean that missed by just a little bit. And if any of those land, the whole complexion of the fight winds up changing." Probably true. But part of his thing was like, I think the lighting in the lighting in the sphere really threw us off. And, all right. Look, I freely admit that the sphere was set up and is a somewhat unique environment that no one had been in before. Okay, fair enough. It might have messed with a few things. I'm not saying he's whistling Dixie. I don't think he's just making an excuse out of the ether for why they lost. I am saying, one, it's a bad look when like the lighting. Even though it's a legitimate factor, like it's a weird thing to kind of hang your hat on in some respects. So PR, it's not great. Second, pretending that Merab had no agency in any of that is just, it's a talking point, not a reality. What Merab was doing was impacting how things were going. Full stop. And now we're going to be in a more traditional setup, so I don't imagine that will be a complaint that's going to be leveled here. But O'Malley also hasn't fought since he lost the belt, right? Yeah, that was September of last year, so almost a year out, and somehow gets an immediate rematch. It's not an immediate rematch from Merab. Merab beat Umar. um, So, I mean, look, here's the reality of this. Like, Sean O'Malley's not a bad fighter. He's a little bit of a weird dude, but people sort of transplant their reaction to his personality onto his fighting ability, and that's a mistake. Those two things are not all that related. But Merab hasn't lost since 2018 when Ricky Simone caught him in a last-minute guillotine, um, and then got a technical submission. That's a weird fight. That's just a weird fight to watch. But he hasn't lost since then. He's only got one finish. It was the washed version of Marlon Moraes, and frankly, they could have stopped that fight in the first round to give the win to Moraes, but that's not an all-time bad non-stoppage for the record. I'm saying you could have stopped that, but Merab's just kind of Merab at this point. We all know what we're getting into. I think O'Malley's going to be a little bit more prepared this time, but I don't know that his game just lines up all that well with Merab's. If he can land a little bit more of what he was looking at distance, then yeah, he could change some of the complexion of this. His front kicks are a problem in particular. He bothered Merab with them in the first fight. If he's smart about using them in the second, it could be a thing to pay attention to. But Merab's got a real good chin. Even if he gets hit, he recovers very well. He's got an endless gas tank. He excels at winning rounds, even in some of the cases when I thought he didn't win the round. I actually scored that fight between him and Umar for Umar, but Merab's good at winning rounds. And being good at winning rounds it will eventually bite you in MMA because there's so many ways for things to go sideways on you. But he's a hard guy to beat. And I think the pace is going to be a problem for O'Malley. It was last time. I think it will be again. Frankly, I think it's a problem for everyone in that division to try and keep up with Merab. And Merab just really good at icing rounds, man. Doing enough, win the round, move on. So, odds are with Merab. I'm picking Merab, but I mean, as a minor aside, the odds on this are minus 300, give or take, for Merab. I'd be sweating that. Pardon me. I would be sweating that. Oh, sorry about that. Jeez. Had to pause recording there for a minute and clear that. I would be sweating a little bit if I was trying to hold, if I had to hold O'Malley at plus 250 on this. That, I understand it, but if you ask me like what I think is the most accurate reflection of how I think this fight would go, it's probably more like minus 250 Merab, which would be what, plus 180-ish on O'Malley. But who knows? That's just my read on the fight, not because odds are influenced by a lot of things. But like, what do I personally think is would in those terms be an accurate representation of how much I favor Merab? It's not 3-1 personally. 2.5-ish. It's a bit more where I would personally, how I personally kind of lean. But we're gonna find out. Bantamweight belt on the line. We'll see what happens. Yeah. Co-main event for the women's bantamweight title. Juliana Pena and Kayla Harrison and So, the event last night, because they lost so many fights, we were like 40 minutes before the first fight started. And there was a lot of downtime. So we got a lot of sound bites of Pena and Harrison chirping at each other, and Juliana Pena remains just insufferable. Golly. This whole division sucks. The only thing that the only thing that might prolong things for a little bit is if Harrison wins and Amanda Nunes comes out of retirement to fight her. Like, that's kind of what everyone's thinking. Even if that is what happens, though, you haven't actually solved the problem. Women's bantamweight still sucks. Two of your top contenders just fought up at featherweight because Vieira couldn't make weight. You've done no cultivation of this division. Nothing about this is good. Look, Pena has a degree of physical toughness. She took a beating from Amanda Nunes in that second fight. But the type of damage Harrison puts on you is different. Because she uses a lot more elbows. She, cuts people up. Instead of... because Nunes just punches the crap out of you, mostly. Odds are heavily with Harrison. I think Pena's going to wind up falling into a lot of clinches. She's going to get thrown at least once. And getting out from under Kayla Harrison is a nightmare, man. If you've never had a real judoka pin you, because in judo you can win by pinning someone, you just have to pin them for a 10 count. Judo pins are... Someone who knows what they're doing from judo to pin you, oh boy is that. That's a thing, man. So, point being, getting out from under Kayla Harrison is a nightmare. Not impossible, but nightmare. Assuming the weight cut doesn't just destroy Kayla beforehand, look, if this goes real deep, things might swing a little bit towards Pena. But I'm picking Harrison. I don't think she'll be champion for a long time. I don't think 135 is sustainable. Her Olympic gold medals came at 170 pounds in that range. Getting to 145 was tough for her. Her getting to 135 is not something I think she can do all that often. But, yeah. So, we'll see how that fight goes. I don't have a lot to add to it. That division sucks. There's nothing exciting about it outside of Kayla Harrison. And even that is, a tad dodgy. Just because I don't think she's a long-term investment for the weight class. Moving on to middleweight, they rebooked Kelvin Gastelum and Joe Pyfer for this one. They were supposed to fight in Mexico a while back. Pyfer got sick, insulted the country of Mexico and all the Mexican people. And I just have to say, man, how stupid are you? We went to Mexico and decided, as I'm in the run-up to my fight, to sample the local cuisine. Like, buddy, you asked for this. You don't do that. This is not just a fighting thing. Any professional athlete, this is the weirdest thing in the world, mind you, but if you talk with athletes, especially athletes that travel, what do you eat when you travel internationally? They go to McDonald's. You want to know why they go to McDonald's? One, you can get the caloric needs met for relatively cheap money. Two, you can actually get enough calories, because depending on what you're doing, you might need a lot. Three, this is going to sound weird, but places like Burger King and McDonald's and these international fast food joints, you would not, if this sounds weird unless you think about it or you've been inside of it, you would not believe the quality control that goes on in those places. You really would not. And you might say, but it's McDonald's. Quality control, what are you talking about? Because if you get food poisoning from McDonald's, you sue them. If you get food poisoning from like a food truck in Mexico, what are you going to do? You're going to sue the food truck guy? No. Dude, if I get food poisoning from like a hole-in-the-wall restaurant around here, I'm not sure I can actually like file a legitimate lawsuit with a reasonable shot of getting a payout. Bear in mind, like, I've had food poisoning once before in my life. No idea what actually caused it. Most miserable I've been for like any individual 48, wasn't quite 72-hour stretch. I almost went to the hospital. Like, yeah. I think I've told this before. Like, I legitimately could not drink water. I'd drink water and then 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, I'm vomiting. Which means you can't keep medication down. So I was like dehydrated. I was a mess. I did come up with the best bit of advice though, and I know this was like the only, I can't say it's the literal only, but one of the only bits of advice I've given my brothers, because I'm the oldest of four kids. After my bout with food poisoning, I remember distinctly the only thing I could really drink. Couldn't keep it down, mind you, but I would drink flat Coke because it did not hurt or taste nearly as bad coming up as water. This is the weirdest thing. I don't know if any of you will agree with me or not, but at least one of my brothers had something similar and tried this and confirmed my findings. I'd drink flat Coke. If I was trying to take meds and get a little bit of that to be absorbed, or just because I needed something, then I go vomit, but flat Coke coming back up, this is weird because, again, it's vomiting and but it kind of tastes almost the same, especially given how rapidly food poisoning will make you puke. So, I don't know if I call it a life hack or not, but if you find yourself in that position, flat Coke. Just take it from me. But if anyone gets something serious like that, look, if you eat Taco Bell and your body's not quite used to it and you make the Taco Bell run to the restroom, that's not cause for kind of like legal action. Everybody knows that. But food poisoning, something serious, yeah, those places are, McDonald's is a big deal. That's a multi-billion-dollar international business. You bet they do everything in their power to not be liable, to not be for any kind of food contamination issue. once again, sounds crazy because we think of these fast food places as low quality. And I'm not here to say that it's the best thing in the world I've ever eaten or the best thing for me that I've ever eaten, but I've never been legitimately sick because of a major fast food chain. So if you're a performance athlete and you travel internationally, before your game, you don't go try the local cuisine. You don't go to the place that the locals tell you to go. You go to the place that you know will give you the performance you need as safely as possible. Violating that standard gets you sick. And that's kind of what Pfeiffer did. Anyway, I'm on a tangent. And then Pfeiffer blamed everyone except his own decision making because this is what we do. I don't care that. Look, I've never cared for Joe Pfeiffer. I don't care for Kelvin Gastelum either, so it's not like I got a dog in this hunt. I think I was favoring Pfeiffer the first time around. Gastelum's a little bit washed. I mean, it's weird because he's only 33. So weird to think about him being that young. But he's 33 this is his 30th professional fight. And he's been in the UFC since, 13. So 12 years in the UFC. Yeah, April of 13, he's over 12 years. He's in his 13th year in the UFC. Like, that just gets to you, man. You getting to the UFC young kind of frequently means you don't stay there. You don't stay there until you're pushing 40. He's 33, but there are some miles on that dude. And I mean, Pfeiffer's only lost in the UFC was to Jack Hermanson. Now, in fairness, Gastelum also lost to Jack Hermanson. Pfeiffer did win his last fight, beat Marc-Andre Barrios. Gastelum is a little bit is a step up from Barrios, probably a little bit down from Hermanson in terms of overall skill. But Hermanson doesn't fight often enough to be a giant player in the division anyway. Well, the odds on this are lopsided. Okay, if you just want a little bit of value on your card, plus 300 on Gastelum is a tempting little morsel. I'm going to go with Pfeiffer, but one, I expect those odds to get closer by the time we get to the fight, I would assume. Two, I'm not super sold on that, but bantamweight next, Patchy Mix, former Bellator bantamweight champion, makes his UFC debut against Mario Bautista, public enemy number 1 around here. Bautista hasn't lost since 21 when he lost to Trevin Jones. Since then, beat Jay Perrin, Brian Kelleher, Benito Lopez, Guido Canetti, Damon Blackshear, Ricky Simone, and that fight with Jose Aldo, man. That hurt on some levels. Mix, by contrast, his last loss was in 2020 to Juan Archuleta. Since then, he's submitted Albert Morales, submitted James Gallagher, beat Kyoji Horiguchi, submitted Magomed Magomedov, knocked out Rafael Stotts, choked out Sergio Pettis, and beat Magomed Magomedov again. Now, that Magomed Magomedov rematch, which was May of last year, he's been out for that long because PFL sucks from a logistical standpoint. That was a tough fight. That was split. I kind of agreed that Mix won, but he didn't look like the guy who bulldozed the division, who bulldozed his way through a tournament. Because he kind of ran over Sergio Pettis too. Mix is legit, but the question here is like, is he on? This came together somewhat quickly. Is he going to be ready for a guy who fights like Bautista does? Because Bautista's not a bad fighter. My moaning about the way he fought Aldo aside, Bautista's usually on the more exciting end of things. He's got a good motor, and he's pretty good about winning rounds. Odds favor Mix ever so slightly, I'm going to asterisk this one. I need to rewatch a couple of things for both guys. Because he's been on my mind because of the PFL stuff, but his skill set hasn't really been on my mind because I haven't had to think about him fighting. So I need to rewatch a few of his fights. And I have vague recollections of his most recent one, but again, that's over a year ago. So I'm going to asterisk that one, but for the sake of the moment, I'm going with Mix. And kicking off the main card, we have Vicente Luque and Kevin Holland. Luque at this point, I don't know what to make of him. I mean, he got a decent win over Temba Garimbo with an anaconda choke his last time out, but Garimbo, it's another guy does real good against a certain level of opposition. I mean, look, he got knocked out by Buckley before that. He beat kind of the ghost of Rafael dos Anjos, but he had the brain bleed after the Jeff Neal fight, the knockout that came before that one. And then there's Holland, who just, when he's on, he's legitimately on, but he fights in these weird, inadvisable ways, in these weird, inadvisable fights. Like, boy, I'll move back up to middleweight. Okay, you beat Mikhail Oleksiejczuk via the ref getting involved in your armbar, which I would have too, for the record. I'm not throwing shade at the ref. Well, what happened after that? Well, you broke a rib against Roman Dolidze, and then you got run over by Reinier de Ridder. Because middleweight's a weird division for you. You don't have a lot of the strength. You have the length for it, but you don't have the strength for it, and unless you're going to really change your body type. Fight at welterweight. So he went back to welterweight and beat Gunnar Nelson. And Gunner's like one appearance every 8. Gunnar Nelson at this point is like borderline a mythical creature. If you weren't around for when he was fighting regularly, like then he just like surfaces out of the Black Lagoon every 2 years for an appearance and then recedes back into the depths. Him and Jack Hermanson. Mythical creatures. I think this is Holland, as far as the pick goes. Look, Luque's a tad chinny, and Holland's got decent accuracy. They both have good front headlock series, but it's hard to catch Holland with those. Not impossible, but he knows his way around a front headlock series, and that's kind of what Luque has in the grappling. So, go with Holland. Once again, I'm not enthused by this card. Opinion might change the closer we get to it, but I'm struggling a little bit. All right, that's your main card. Not the worst pay-per-view I've ever seen, but this looks a lot better, mostly by comparison than on its own merits. On the prelims, Josh Van and Bruno Silva. This is a pretty good fight. I'm always down for a Josh Van fight. Silva coming off of a loss to Manel Kape. That was weird. It was a weird finish. It was a complaint of a groin kick that may or may not have been, and Silva kept kicking Kape in the groin, lost a point in the second round. Weird fight in that respect. Whereas Van, 3-fight winning streak. His only loss in the UFC was that Charles Johnson loss. He gave Johnson hell before Johnson caught him with that uppercut in the third. I mean, they gave each other hell. I shouldn't just say, Johnson was a punching bag. He wasn't. But, yeah, most recently, wins over Edgar Chairez, Cody Durden, and Ray Saruya. This is a good fight. Outside of Mix's debut, this is the one I'm most curious about on this card. As for picks, I'm going with Van. Not anti-Silva, but I'm still kind of a believer in Van. So, light heavyweights next, God help us. Azamat Murzakanov and Brandon Hiberio. So, Murzakanov has actually done decent work in the UFC. He's undefeated, 14-0. Let's see. 4-0? Yeah, 4-0 in the UFC. Been out of act. He's had a couple of fights fall out with Nikita Krylov and Johnny Walker since his last win. Boy, this poor guy, man. Like, he wins on the Contender Series, has 3 fights fall out, finally does get the fight with Tefan Chukwi. Knocks him out. Beats Devin Clark, beats Dustin Jacoby, has fights fall out. When I say loses fight, like the fights didn't happen. With Volkan Oezdemir and then Khalil Roundtree. Then he beats Alonzo Menafield. Then he has fights fall out with, as mentioned, Krylov and Walker before getting Hibario. That's a weird string of luck he's had. Some of that is broken in his favor. There's a few of those I would not have favored him to win. So, yeah. Let's see. And moving over to Hibario. Boy, is it just me or has Tapology become almost unnavigable? I think they have like one of the higher standards of fighter data acquisition, but man, I just like navigating their sites become a giant pain. So many ads. Anyway, Hibario 17-7. Yeah, with a no contest in there for good measure. 2-2 in the UFC. Lost his first two to Zhang Mingyang and Magomed Gaziasulov. No real shame in those. Split decision over Kaio Machado. Okay, and then he Kimura Dimar Nurgozai. I remember that. That was a weird one. He was losing that fight. Then he hit the Kimura sweep and got it. So, yeah, not the biggest believer in Hibario. I think the odds are with Mirzakhanov. Yeah, and I will agree with that. That's a V at the end. I'm a decent believer in Mirzakhanov, in addition to my habit of generally picking Russians to beat Brazilians. Heavyweight next. God help us. Sergey Spivak and Waldo Cortez Acosta. Okay, so Spivak, the old polar bear, coming off a loss to Jailton Almeida. He armbarred Marcin Tybura before that. Lost to Cyril Gahn. It was a bad loss. Here's the thing about Spivak. He's a pretty good grappler. Doesn't react the best to being hit, and that's kind of all Waldo Cortez Acosta does. But if they hit the mat, Waldo Cortez Acosta is not a very good grappler. So it's kind of a which way do you think that's going to swing? I'm actually going to go with Spivak. I have not been a big believer. I've not been very impressed with Cortez Acosta. Just throwing that out there. What are the odds? Odds slightly favor Spivak. They're about where I am. I might even be a little bit ahead of those odds. Odds are like 120, minus 120 to plus 100, plus 105, something like that. So they're quite close. I'm a little bit wider than that, but Spivak's reaction to being hit is still not great, so who knows. Welterweight next. So Chaos Williams will fight Andreas Gustafsson. This was supposed to be Chaos Williams and Uros Medic. Medic had a issue with sinusitis, was replaced by Albert Tadevosian. I'm going to assume that's a very Armenian name. But Tadevosian did not pass medical tests, so now he's fighting Gustafsson, who was supposed to fight last week, and that fell out. So we're just slapdashing this stuff together. I don't know enough about Gustafsson to have a good feeling about this, so I'm going to lean towards Williams. And that's really all I've got there. I just don't know enough about Gustafsson. On the early prelims, we have Ariane De Silva and Wang Tong. They're once again trying to rebound Wang Tong after her loss to Gabriela Fernandez. She had an okay performance against Bruna Brazil. Dude, her just murking Victoria Leonardo wildly inflated everyone's expectations. I still have moderately high expectations for her, but there were a bunch of people like, boy, she's going to kill women. And it turns out, Gabriela Fernandez did a decent job of handling what was going on there. And Bruna Brazil lost, clearly, but it wasn't a blowout. Like I said, I'm still going with Wong. And Ariane De Silva, bless her, is just... This is the former Ariane Lipski. She's just kind of here. She's on a two-fight losing streak to Karini Silva and Jasmine Jasdavicius. Once again, you know what they're after. They're after a Wong Tong win, and I think they'll get it. At featherweight, Yeka Saragi and Jusong Yu. Let's have a look at these gentlemen. So Saragi, 14-4, 1-2 in the UFC. Lost his debut to Anshul Jubli. Beat Lucas Alexander, decent win. Got kind of smoked by Weston Wilson his last time out, though. And you, undefeated, 8-0. This is his UFC debut. I'm kind of thinking him. I'm kind of thinking you. Hang on. See if the odds agree with me, just out of curiosity. I'm going with you. Oh, they're heavily with you. Okay. They've seen more of him than I have. Some of that for me was just tea leaf reading. Because Saragi, I don't think he's bad, but he's one of those guys that I don't know that getting to the UFC when he did was the right call. Lightweights next, Quillen Salkild and Yanal Ashmuz. I don't know about that one. Probably Salkild. Ashmuz isn't bad, but he's very tough. So Salkild knocked out Anshul Jubli in his UFC debut back in February in no time at all. They're both 8-1. Ashmuz had more UFC fights. He's 2-1 in the UFC. Beat Sam Patterson, lost to Chris Duncan. He broke his arm in that fight. Didn't give up though. And Trevor Peek, he's got I'm going with Salkild, I think. Watch the odds be like comically in his favor. Yeah, that borders on the comical. All right. Let me make sure I'm spelling this guy's name right. Salkild. Double up on the L there. Okay, and kicking everything off at lightweight, Markel Medeiros, who recall was supposed to fight last week. Well, this most recent card. Now fights Mark Chonsky. So, what do we know about these two gentlemen? Medeiros, 10-1, 8-fight winning streak. 2-0 in the UFC, wins over Lando Quinones and then Austin Hubbard. Split decision win over Hubbard. I think I scored it for him, but that was also one of those ones I think 29-20 either way was probably fine. Chonsky. His nickname does not tell me how to pronounce his. Sometimes the nickname will actually give me a clue about pronunciation of the last name if they're meant to rhyme or something, but this is Mark the Shark. So I'm going with Chonsky. It's supposed to be Choinsky. I don't know. That might be an accent thing. Anyway, as I mentioned, undefeated, 8-0. This is his UFC debut. Did a lot of fighting in Anthony Pettis' promotion. A couple of LFA fights as well, so respectable regional scene. I'm just going to go with the odds on this one because I don't know enough about either guy. At the moment, the odds are with Medeiros. I'm going to asterisk this one only in the sense that I'm just sticking with the favorite. Whoever's the favorite at close is who I'm going to pick, so that's where we'll be on that one. All right, that is the predictions, so that will be UFC 316, Saturday, MMAZone411mania.com. Y'all know where you can find me. Stop by, say hello. I appreciate it. All right, that can close. That closes. That closes. You can stay open. Let's put that over there. Okay. So let's talk about some news that came out of last night. UFC 320 was set to be in September. We talked a little bit about this last week, but the arena being built in Guadalajara has had a lot of construction delays. Well, they've now canceled UFC 320, will no longer be at that venue. It has been moved to San Antonio, Texas. It is also no longer a pay-per-view. It is now listed as a fight night, which means we can stop the BS Yair Rodriguez title shot against Alexander Volkanovski that nobody wants. I mean, apart from Yair. Yair probably wants it. Nobody else does. But you're not in Mexico trying to pander. You're not even on pay-per-view, so you don't need a title fight. Not saying I want Volkanovski not to fight. I'm just saying some of the math here changes for the UFC with a fight night. That might also clear the way for Dana White and TKO Boxing to promote Canelo Crawford, because that will be a pay-per-view that airs that same week. And since they're not having a pay-per-view conflict, then that's not any kind of an issue. I still don't know that that's going to be a thing that happens. There's a handful of moving parts behind the scenes there, but long and the short of it, UFC 320 is no longer UFC 320. It's UFC San Antonio, UFC on ESPN, whatever, when the time comes around. So be on the lookout for that. I'll still be covering it, but more fights will be announced as we get closer. But finally, we got, again, they were asked about this a while ago. The news kind of caught up to it, at least in my circles, last week. That's why I talked about it. Now we have confirmation that, yeah, that construction is just behind schedule by a fair bit. So more on that when it comes about. So there we go on that. All right. Some really... I'm not happy to talk about this, but the BJ Penn situation gets worse. During the last week, BJ Penn has been arrested 3 times. There's a restraining order against him from, I believe, his mother, who's worried about his erratic behavior. He sought a restraining order that was not granted. Yeah. This is getting bad, and it's getting bad in a hurry. I don't even want to throw this out. I've mentioned before, like, I don't need to throw this into the universe as something like I want to happen or whatnot. I don't. But I've said for a while, MMA has its reckoning with brain damage coming. And there's a few different people that a lot of us were like, I hate to phrase it this way, but who's going to pull the Benoit? Now, I'm obviously not wishing for the murder, suicide, family annihilation. It's terrible. God awful. But that was the culmination of a handful of things over the course of about 18 months to 2 years where pro wrestling had to have their reckoning with not just PEDs, which had kind of come about because of Eddie Guerrero and his unfortunate passing early in life, but the combination of, various drugs and brain damage. MMA has been skirting around it. Boxing had this moment. I've had this several times. And it continues to be a thing with boxing, but boxing has kind of just done everything that is reasonable given what they do. But they had their moment. There's a reason we don't have 15-round fights anymore in boxing. That's a thing. That's not an accident. That was a choice to help limit brain damage. Boxing had their come to Jesus moment about this, had their reckoning. Professional wrestling has had their reckoning about this. MMA's is due. It is due for MMA in general and the UFC maybe in particular to have their reckoning about brain damage related to the sport. And BJ Penn's unfortunately one of those guys that a lot of us looked at like, he might be one. He might be the one. Now, again, when I say who's going to pull the Benoit, I don't want family annihilation, but high profile major incident or major issue that forces you to reckon. Looks like it's going that way. And there's other guys that have had sort of this stuff that it floats around the periphery for a lot. I mean, Brendan Schaub talking a couple of months back, more than a couple, but he was talking about Shane Carwin and the state he's in, and it's not good. Um, you've got John Jones talking with younger fighters now about, guys, if you leave training with a headache, you're doing it wrong. You got to minimize that. Don't give yourself away in the gym. And it's just coming up a little bit more and more. I'm going to see it more and more. And BJ Penn seems to be the guy that's in a public. He's the one that's got the attention, suffering the serious side effects of brain damage like this. And I hope he gets help. I hope there is some way to stop something really, really bad from happening. Um, but yeah, that's going south in a hurry. That situation, it seems. So, not a lot, moving on. Last bit of news I have written down, then we'll check social medias for stuff and see what's up there. But so there are two new lawsuits that have been filed against the UFC. One is from Misha Serkinov. He is challenging a clause in the UFC contracts that at the moment prevents them from joining class action lawsuits and forces them to go through binding arbitration. He's challenging the legality of this, and frankly, it is a clause that deserves challenging. I'd need to see some of the specific legal arguments, but my personal opinion, and this is not a legal opinion, this is my feeling on how these things should be conducted generally, is that a clause in a contract that requires arbitration, an attempt at arbitration before legal action doesn't strike me as outside the bounds. One that signs away your right to join a class action lawsuit or to benefit from a class action lawsuit, that seems beyond the pale to me. So that is a clause in fighter contracts that I think deserves to be challenged. Serkinov's challenging it. God bless him for it. He's going to get a mountain of backlash from it. But I think he's doing the right thing there. So there's that one. Then there's Phil Davis. Phil Davis has filed a lawsuit. He that is not seeking monetary damages necessarily. He's not after money. He wants injunctive relief about the UFC's contract structure. His argument is that the UFC's long-term restrictive contracts are unfair business practices and unduly damage the competition and whatnot. And so he's looking for, you have to understand what injunctive relief is. Injunctive relief is a judicial order that things start going a certain way. So you can have injunctions against different things. Sometimes you get temporary injunctions while further legal stuff plays out. There's a lot of different ways to go about this, but he is specifically seeking an injunctive relief. So for the court, this would be the federal court, to order the UFC's contracts to not extend beyond, I think his request is 1 year. That's a big deal. The length of UFC contracts is a way that they monkey with their control of the sport. Especially if you come in from the Contender Series, you have a long contract with a certain number of fights at your entry-level wages. I'll say that politely. And it just goes for a while, and then they try to re-sign you, and there's ways they can add more time to your contract. Not going to go into all of them. But Phil Davis is basically saying this is BS. They all need to have a 1-year sunset clause. If he's not gonna have a hard time arguing that the UFC is in a monopsonistic position. I think as a general rule, especially with some of the stuff from the previous lawsuit, even the stuff that was settled, there's a lot of written opinions from the judge in that case, it was Judge Boulware, that can be used to help support their case here. If we're looking at the UFC's market position. And his argument is just going to be that they shouldn't have more than a 1-year contract. That might be a bit hard. As a number, to argue that 1 year is it might be a bit harder to prove. But if you get even a 2-year deal, that something that says the UFC contracts cannot extend beyond 2 years, that would change how the UFC has to do some business financially. So we'll see. These are just filed. Lawsuits can take a long time, but a lot of lawyers are going to be quite happy to send billable hours while suing the UFC again. And I'm sure the UFC lawyers are happy to bill them to defend them. That sounds like I'm against the civil judicial system, and I am not at all. It is just kind of an observation about the way things go. So, anywho, there's that. So we'll keep an eye on those lawsuits as much as we can over here. So, stay tuned for more as those develop. Okay, let me check the social media, see if anything, if fight related has broken as far as news go. If not, we will do plugs and get out of here. Okay. Nope, nothing new there. So what am I going to plug this week? A couple of podcasts. Monday on Damn You Hollywood, we will be reviewing Karate Kid Legends, or cheap nostalgia bait. I know why it's on the schedule. We're going to talk about it, but I've got nothing for that movie. I mean, I've got nothing. So tune in. Mark and I will figure out something to talk about because that's what we do. We're pretty good about it, and again, we'll figure something out. That's just me and him, right? Yeah. Then on Thursday, look, this is Mark Radlich's birthday week, and we're all doing some stuff that you do for someone's birthday. So, like earlier on Sunday, Mark and Jesse talked Stripperella. Thursday, Mark, Jesse, and me, the triumvirate, three wise men, we will be reviewing a trio of Nicholas Winding Refn films over on Triple Feature because we've talked Refn before. The three of us, reviewed Too Old to Die Young, which is still one of the most frustrating, bizarre viewing experiences I have ever had. And I don't even mean bizarre in a way that, like, interests me or tickles my fancy or anything like that. It's just not really a thing. So, yeah, that's we're gonna we'll figure that out. But we'll be talking about Drive, Bronson, and the Neon Demon. Two of those I've seen before. One of them I haven't. Haven't seen the Neon Demon. Haven't seen Drive and Bronson though. So tune in for that if you're interested in any of that. The coverage will be the usual stuff. WWE SmackDown on Friday, UFC event on Saturday. Back here next week to review UFC 316, and we will preview UFC on ESPN 69. Nice. Yeah. Somebody was going to say it. Some of you did. I know you did. Don't pretend you didn't. I can see you. That is the card in Georgia. It's headlined by Kamaru Usman and Joaquin Buckley. What else is there? A lot of people talking about, boy, June's stacked, and your co-main event is Rose Namajunas and Miranda Maverick. No. Cody Garbrandt and Hani Barcelos. Okay. They're both kind of washed. I don't care about Shabazi and Petrosky. Yeah, this is not blowing my skirt up. Michael Chiesa and Court McGee. I've got a sentimental attachment to Court, but yeah, this is not a bad card. But like, what are we supposed to be excited about? Mansour Abdul Malik and Cody Brundage? Look, Shabazian, he's fighting a guy who does everything that makes his life difficult, and it's not like I think Petrosky's all that good either. Because I don't. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. Like, I'm interested in that main event. Genuinely want to see how washed Kamaru Usman is. Curious to see if Joaquin Buckley can really make the push to the title picture. But, like, again, am I supposed to be excited about Cody Garbrandt and Hani Barcelos? Cody Garbrandt got choked out by Davison Figueiredo a little over a year ago. I mean, his only wins in the last little bit, so he wins the belt in 2016, loses to TJ, loses to TJ again, loses to Pedro Munoz, beats Rafael Assunção, then loses to Rob Font, then cuts to flyweight, gets blitzed by Kai Kara France, goes back to bantamweight, and he gets a decision over Trevin Jones. He beats Brian Kelleher, who was kind of washed, and he loses to Figueiredo. Like, you tell me look, Cody Garbrandt had a stretch of like the six most impressive rounds I've ever seen. Some of them. Then you got Barcelos, who's 38 at this point, and is just kind of washed. They're both washed. I'm sorry, I can't be super pumped about this. Really good main event. Seriously, really good main event, but there is not a lot supporting it. I mean, Rose at flyweight has been, I can't say a disaster, but hasn't been good. And Miranda Maverick seems to have stalled out in her career. I know she's only 27, and she is on a 4-fight winning streak, but like she's never beat anybody close to Rose Namajunas' level. She should have beat Macy Barber when they fought in 21, but the Blanchfield loss was decisive. So was the loss to Jasmine Jasdavicius. Like, I don't know. It is a really good main event, and there is not a lot supporting the top of that card. Full preview next week, so tune in for that. All right. That's it for me. I've taken up enough of your time, which I'm very, very grateful you choose to spend with me in some capacity. So thank you, as always. Stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.